Hi, it's KCCK's Culture Crawl. I'm Dennis Green, and my guest today is an author with Iowa Connections, Jennifer Fawcett, joining me from her home in upstate New York.
Upstate New York, Albany.
Jennifer is a former Iowa resident. You were here a couple of times, I think. Yes?
I kept coming back. I couldn't stay away. Yeah.
Most recently, you and your husband Sean were here when he was the artistic director at Riverside Theater. So you've now been gone a few years.
A few years, yep. But still, keeping tabs from a distance and kind of trying to stay involved. I have had some theater work happening at the various theaters in the state, and just sort of, watching online, like to see how things are changing and growing and everything, and especially in Iowa City.
Well, you are well known as a playwright, certainly around here, because we've had several of your plays produced. Beneath the Stairs is your first novel.
Yes.
I remember vivid, the play I remember most is Apples in Winter, but that's only one of several things that you've had produced here locally.
Yeah, but probably that. I mean, Riverside just recently did they redid for radio a play of mine called The Kreutzer Sonata with IPR. But prior to that, I would say Apples in Winter was the most sort of recent. So I guess it's a few years ago now. Time has flown.
Time flies. I've noticed that. It just gets faster and faster.
Yes.
Beneath the Stairs, as I said, is your first novel, and spoiler alert, it's awesome.
Thank you.
I just finished it a few days ago, and I have so many questions that I won't get to, but we'll try and give a good sketch and
sure.
Talk about how it came to be, and and what's in it, and that type of thing as we go. But before we dive into that, let's start with, you are a published playwright with many plays under your belt. Why did you decide to go into novel writing?
I've always wanted to write a novel. It's been like a lifelong dream to walk into a bookstore and see my own book there. I love books, and a variety of types of stories. So yeah, it's been a lifelong dream, and the novel actually was born in Iowa City, out of NaNoWriMo. So it was sort of an experiment initially. So NaNoWriMo, for anybody who doesn't know, is the National Novel Writing Month. So really it should be called the International, because it's global. It's the month of November, and the goal is to try and write 50,000 words in the month of November. And which is not actually that would be a pretty short novel, but it's definitely a good step towards one. And so I did that. A friend challenged me to do that. We were living in Iowa City. I was out of graduate school. I went to the University of Iowa, but I was done that, and I was in immigration limbo. So I couldn't work. I'm now a dual citizen, but at the time I was a Canadian citizen waiting for my green card. Couldn't work, totally broke. So all I had was time. And so I thought, okay, I'll try this, and really liked it, and sort of stumbled my way through. It's not about quality, it's only about quantity, which is actually, I think, a really good way to approach a new project, is not to try and turn the editor off. But yeah, it was a new form, but I had a lot of fun being able to write in that form. So yeah, I wrote my 50,000 words. I think I actually hit 60,000, and then didn't know how to end it, but it just sort of stuck with me. And I would pick it up and put it down for many years, because then a play would come up, a play project would come up. So I would be focused on, I'm not good at working on more than one thing at a time. Some writers are, I'm not. So I would have to, be fully immersed in the play project. But then when that was done, I would put that down, and I'd go back to this unfinished thing on my computer, and just kept coming back to it. But there are things that you can do with a novel that you can't do with a play, and vice versa. So it was just really fun to get to, do the thing that I love doing, which is telling a story, but to get to play with some new tools. sort of thing.
How close is that original 50,000 word draft to what got published?
Parts of it are pretty close, actually. A lot of that draft was so the novel takes place. There are several timelines. There are a few points where we dip kind of far into the past, but the two main timelines, there's the present, and then there's 1998, which is when the protagonist was 14 years old. And so that story, the story of the protagonist at 14, going into this haunted house with her friends, that was really what was born in NaNoWriMo. And a lot of that, I would say, is still there. A lot of pretty much everything else around it has been rewritten many, many times. But that core story there has always stayed. Now, much has been pulled out. There've been a lot of revisions, so there's a lot. I would say it's not even an exaggeration to say there are probably 1 or 2 books worth of words on the metaphorical cutting room floor, sort of thing, or the trash. They're not actually in a trash bin, because I keep them, but they're just in many, many files on my computer.
And that core story about teenage girls visiting a supposed haunted house, that is rooted in your own life.
Yes. Yeah, it was. And so, because when I sat down to, my friend said, try NaNoWriMo, and I was like, oh, that sounds terrifying. Okay, sure, I'll try. Where do I start? For some reason, that was the image that popped into my head, was these 4 girls with like summer day, their bikes beside them, so they've been biking around, and they're standing in front of this abandoned, supposedly haunted house, trying to decide if they're going to go in. That was what sort of came. And I do think that it came, I don't know why I was thinking about it, why it popped into my head, but when I was about that age, I did the same. Yeah, I did the same thing. My friends and I had a summer of bike riding. Basically, I grew up in Eastern Ontario in a very rural area, so just lots of back roads, dirt roads, sort of thing. Not a lot of traffic to worry about, and we would just ride around all day, just for miles and miles. And at some point, one of them learned about this supposedly haunted house that was in our area, and that was just like so exciting, because we'd all grown up there. It was all we knew. It was also very kind of ho-hum, because it's like, whatever, it's just where we live. So to learn that this thing was there and had been there this whole time was really exciting. And of course we had to go, because when you're that age, if somebody dangles that in front of you, how can you not? It's funny, in the process of doing this book, that's how my parents have learned that I did this. They never, they're like, you what? Like, it's too late now. That was decades ago. So yeah, we went to this house. It really was, I mean, we probably passed it 100 times on the school bus, but it was off the road and you couldn't really see it. And we went in, and I think I was in there for maybe 5 minutes, but something about that stuck with me. So then fast forward all those decades later, and this image pops into my head, and the book is born out of that. I mean, but the question was, though, like, was it really haunted? I don't know. I went in with the expectation that it was.
The visit to the haunted house in the book is, of course, the inciting event that may or may not be the exciting event that causes, I guess I'll just call it, brokenness to happen in several of the characters. Is it, are the broken emotional relationships and difficulties that primarily the two characters that we spend the most time with, Claire and Abby, are, is it because of their visit to the haunted house and something terrible and supernatural that happened to them, or was all that already there in them, and this experience just kind of brought it out? So the big tension in this book, and I don't think, and this is a minor spoiler, but not too much, is 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 it supernatural, or is it something that was in them all along that they have to figure out? Tell me
Absolutely.
about working through that, that balance and tension. Was that always the case, or was it something that occurred to you as the project came along?
It was kind of born organically through learning about who these characters were, and thinking about what that experience, I mean, everything that happens in the house is fictional. I made it all up. But thinking about that, I mean, when something, so one of the characters, so Abby, suffers from mental illness, specifically borderline personality disorder. And and I am not by any, I've tried to do some research and, be true to what that is and how that manifests. And I actually had a friend who suffered from that, and she did go into that house with us. I don't think the house had anything to do with what happened to her, but this is a question, right, of what triggers what triggers certain illnesses, I guess, and it's probably, I mean, it's probably a whole combination of factors. But the way you said about, like, has it always been there and it's just sort of been awoken, or was it a specific event? I think it's a very human thing to want to find cause, right? Like when something bad happens, we want something to point to say, well, that's why, right? And it's very human to want to go to something, something that seems to happen just out of the blue or randomly happens. I feel like it's a very natural thing. Certainly it is for me. I guess I can't speak for anybody beyond myself, but to kind of take a step back and go, wait, where did this all start, right? Like if I had turned left instead of right, I maybe wouldn't have ended up here, and that sort of thing. And so I think there's something in Abby and Claire, certainly Claire, the protagonist, feels very much like this house and what happened there is very much responsible for so much that came afterwards. I mean, their friendship was really fractured, and it ended up being a really scary event that happened to them. And then it's just sort of been a domino effect after that. So I think for the protagonist, Claire, that makes sense to go back and kind of point to that as the beginning of where things went wrong. Whether it is or not, I'm not sure, but I think that exploration is very real, very human. Hopefully feels true to people, wanting to know why her, why, in the case of my friend, like, why her, why did she have to suffer that way? Why did she have to fight those demons? And that was also, I think, kind of swirling around in my mind when I was writing as well. And again, having a scary house or a ghost, right? Like, it gives us that tangible thing to point to and say, that's the cause. But I really struggled with whether there actually was going to be any kind of a actual ghost in the house. I resisted it for a long time, because I was very interested in this idea of where does that fear actually come from? Is that something that we create entirely ourselves, right? Like this house that I went into it as a teenage girl, overcome with the like thrill and romance of this place where, this thing had happened. Apparently a woman had died there, had died tragically, had maybe been killed. we were a little hazy on the details, which was, I think, also part of the fun. I went into it with that expectation, right? So of course, then that was how I was perceiving it. right? Was it actually there? Was there actually like a ghost there? I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea. Like, I don't, some people would say yes, some people would say no. I don't know where I fall. So I was also really interested in um, this idea, especially for, I mean, I think Claire, the protagonist, has a lot of, she doesn't believe in ghosts. She has her reasons for that. And so I also ended up thinking, like, well, what happens if you're somebody who doesn't believe in something like a ghost, and then you are confronted with a ghost, right? So then what does that do? If you're like, I don't believe that exists, and then it's there in front of you. And so that was also something that I was really interested in exploring.
Along the line, as maybe you were sharing with beta readers or working with your agent or publishers, did anyone ever say to you, look, you got to pick a side? It's either
Yeah,
a ghost story or it's a literary character study.
absolutely. Yeah, and that was honestly, that was a real, we had difficulty finding a home for it, a home for the book. And that was because it does sort of sit in this middle ground. I mean, I guess it's now called literary horror, because it's more literary than a lot of purely genre stuff, but it has all of these markers of thriller and horror and that sort of thing. And it was difficult from a publishing point of view. I mean, publishers have to sell books, they have to know how to market books, they have to know, where is this going to fit? And at first it was really challenging for them. When we were submitting it, people were like, I really like it, but I don't really know how to define it, and so therefore I can't sell it. And where I ended up landing at Atria Books with Simon and Schuster, I feel very lucky that I landed there, and it landed on the desk of an editor who was specifically looking for, I mean, there's all these terms, upmarket horror or literary horror. That was what she was looking for. And I have to say, though, I've read other books that she's edited, and I love all of them because that's the sort of thing that I like. I love literary fiction. I love literature. I want there to be something in the language and a sort of density and a chewiness, the texture to the language. I don't want it to just be like plot, 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 but I also like plot, 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 plot. And I love thrillers and I love suspense and all of that sort of thing. So you ultimately have to kind of write the book that you want to read, as everybody says. And I do think that that's true. And so as I was getting feedback, there were certainly lots of people who were saying, I want you to dial up the horror. You need to dial it up. You need to dial it up. And I, especially as a new novelist, but also as somebody I've written for a while, I have an understanding, or at least I think I have an understanding of, I have to write something that still feels true to who I am and true to me. So I can take the feedback and try and use the feedback, but I also still have these questions and these things that I'm curious about, and they're going to find their way in there, and you're going to like it or you're not going to like it. But I have to like it because I'm writing it. And I mean, I think that's true for every single writer out there. If you ultimately, no matter what if you're writing romance or if you're writing whatever, ultimately it has to feel right to you, or else I don't know. I don't even know how, it would be really hard to write.
Yeah. You have to write a story that you want to read. And there
You have to,
are
exactly.
authors, very successful ones, who just write to their market. Here's here's the audience that I want to reach. And not saying that that's wrong, but
No.
it is not as fulfilling.
Yeah, for me as a reader, it's not as fulfilling. Like, for me as a reader, I love page turners. I want to be like unable to put this book down and just like, oh God, I've got to read one more chapter. It's so good. Right? I love that. It's such a fun experience. But I also want, there's certainly lots of books that I've read that they're page turners and they're fun. They're a fun read, but there's nothing to them. Like, I forget them very easily afterwards because there's nothing to hold on to. And then there are other books that I find myself returning to. And then sometimes I even just like open it and just read a little bit because the writing, the way the author can put together a sentence, there's this sort of texture there that I find very satisfying. There's a complexity to the characters that I find really, really satisfying. But again, that's me, right? That's me. That's not everybody. And it's been interesting seeing people's responses to the book, because there's some people who want it to be scarier. They're like, and then there for other people, they are really intrigued by how there's these other things in it as well. And so, that's, every response is one response is as valid as the other, right? Again, it always still comes back to like, well, I have to write what feels true to me and live with the consequences, I guess.
Well, it's plenty scary as far as I'm
Oh, good.
concerned. But the people that you have created in this book are also very real.
Thank you.
They do things well, then they screw things up. They have to live with how they screw things up.
Yeah.
royally.
And, yeah.
And move forward, like we always do. Life never turns out the way we want it to. We're disappointed. We're hurt.
Or we hurt other people. And that, I think, for, going back to what you were asking before about why this house and the events that happen in that house are seen as such a sort of landmark for these characters. For Claire, this was also, there was a real, it was coming out of feelings in the moment when she was 14 of something that had happened earlier, but ultimately she did something that day to Abby that really hurt her. And so there's something about, here is a young person, a good person, a perfectly nice, normal, whatever, young person who does something to a friend in a moment of being upset that they then have to learn how to live with, right? Like, and she didn't it wasn't violent, or I don't want to give it away, but I also don't want to sound like she stabbed her in the back. She didn't do that.
It was mean.
It was mean. Yeah, it was an act. That's a great way of putting it. It was an act of meanness, of cruelty. And so it was a very unpleasant realization for her that she had the capacity to be cruel. And so I think that's another reason why it's a big sort of landmark for her. She's not a cruel person.
And that is also something that as people we have to learn to live with, is our failures when we are not the person that we want to be or think we are.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's a great read. I so enjoyed it. I recommend it highly to everybody.
Thank you.
Now you've written a novel, you've written a bunch of plays. Yeah. What's next?
Another novel. I'm working on another novel. I don't intend to leave playwriting. I have a few play ideas sort of in the back of my brain. I have to also say, with everything going on with COVID, this has been a very good time not to be trying to write plays, because it's just been so incredibly hard to get them produced. Though I actually have had some produced through people finding really creative means to do that. And huge kudos to all of the arts organizations who have managed to find their way through, a time of not being able to have audiences or live audiences. But I'm really liking novel writing. I like playing with these tools. That's a way of putting it. I like being able to inhabit a story this way. I guess that's another way of saying it. A novel can be in some ways can be a lot bigger than a play, because you don't have to then have a director going, wait, how am I gonna have a volcano on stage, right? Or whatever.
The part that takes place on Saturn.
The part that takes place on Saturn. this is sort of metaphorical, right? Whereas, in a novel, it can be on Saturn. I mean, I'm not, because that's not my bag, but yeah. So, but I'm enjoying that. So I'm working on the next one. So, hopefully will not take me 10 years to write it as it took the last one.
Well, you at the beginning, at the top of our conversation, you said it's a kick to walk into a bookstore and see your book on the shelves. I traveled recently and I walked past bookstores in the various airports, and almost on all of them, oh, there's Jennifer's book. There's Beneath the Stairs. Oh, that's awesome.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I haven't been on an airplane in years. So it's really exciting. Thank you. Yeah, it's been such a thrill getting to see the book out in the world. So yay.
So the book is Beneath the Stairs, available in all the regular places, whether you want an ebook or a physical book. People can also visit you online on your website, where you can read about Jennifer's real life experience at the Octagon House, among other things. And that website is
JenniferFawcettAuthor.com.
And do you have a social media presence too? Can people follow you on?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter at Author Fawcett, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Jennifer Fawcett Author.
Well, it's been awesome to get to have this little conversation with you about the book.
Really nice.
As I've said multiple times, I sure enjoyed it. It's always great. Even though you grew up in Canada, we claim you here in Iowa. You're one of our own, and we love it when one of our own sees a lot of success. So hopefully your travels will bring you back here at some point.
I hope so.
But otherwise, I'll look forward to perhaps chatting with you for the next play or book that comes down the pike.
That will be wonderful. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Again, Jennifer Fawcett, the book is Beneath the Stairs. Jennifer Fawcett Author.com if you'd like to learn more. Jennifer, thanks again for being with me.
Thank you.
You can hear the Culture Crawl live on the radio many weekdays at 10:20, or download the podcast, watch or listen on your own schedule at kcck.org/culture, or however you get your podcasts. I'm Dennis Green, and I'll talk to you later.